What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. Hope you're happy, safe, healthy. I want to wish you a very happy Tuesday, April the 22nd, 2025. There are about 49 hours that separate us from the 2025 NFL draft at the time that this show is live. And we are live every Tuesday and Thursday in the Bleacher Report app. You can, of course, watch this show on demand in the Bleacher Report app and on the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel as well. As you can see down below, there are a number of ways to connect with me. I am RJ Ochoa on social media, so hope that you choose to do so. If you are watching on YouTube, hope you choose to like the video and subscribe. Those are wonderful things in and of their own right. Very busy week last week, obviously the penultimate one before the draft. The last time you saw me was the clip that we shared on YouTube, and obviously if you're in the BR app, you saw the entire mock draft, but we did the creator mock draft. It was a ton of fun. Matthew Golden was my pick for the Dallas Cowboys. Ted McMillan was gone, went to the New Orleans Saints a couple of picks earlier. That was a big bummer. And so this is a very busy week in an obvious way because it is the NFL draft. Let's see here. We will be live on Thursday, on Friday, on Saturday. So you can rest assured that when the Cowboys make their picks, we will get to discuss them together, mano y mano. I'm very excited for that. We'll, of course, have you updated at bloggingtheboys.com, and I'll have all sorts of social posts and things like that as the madness unfolds over the course of the weekend. But this is our last chance, our last opportunity, you and I, mano y mano, as I just said, to kind of discuss, or in this case, predict what we think is going to happen. This is the time to get your final prediction out there, because you can come back and you can say, I told you, I called it. So wherever you're watching, however you're watching, if you want to send it to me on some level of social media, like I said, I want to know who your pick is, who you think the Cowboys are picking is maybe the best way to put it. Get it on the record so that if it hits, you can say, I told you so. Because if you don't say, and then you tell us after the fact, like, oh, I knew all along that it was going to happen, I'm just going to tell you, we're not going to believe you. That's the way it's going to go. In addition to all the draft content, by the way, if you're a YouTuber, the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel on Wednesday, a very special interview that I did on Tuesday with DeMarcus Ware will be dropping on the YouTube channel. So looking forward to that as well. But we mentioned it, draft predictions as far as mostly what's going to happen at 12 overall or in the first round, if you want to tolerate some sort of trade back discussion. But for the draft, as a whole, I would say. So let's take a look at something. I tweeted this out on Tuesday. I'm all lost on days here. This is courtesy of our friends at SB Nation over at FanDuel, their sports book. These are the odds they have. This was as of Tuesday morning. If you happen to look, Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning, it's obviously possible. Odds are subject to change, but these are odds for the position the Cowboys will address in the first round of the NFL draft. As you can see, wide receiver is minus 150. That's the favorite at the moment. Offensive line plus 430. We have a three-way tie for third. Corner, defensive line in general. By the way, offensive line is a generality as well. And running back all plus 850. And tight end, I think that's really, that might as well just be Tyler Warren, right? That's what that line is plus 1700. And I don't know. I know we haven't really spent a ton of time talking about that, but it's just because that feels so unlikely for the Cowboys in terms of him being a possibility or an availability at 12 overall. So relative to possibilities here, relative to names or ideas that make sense, I think that we are zeroing in on, owning in on the idea of Ted McMillan, Matthew Golden, Emeka Egbuka. I mean, these are the kind of options that I think we're expecting the Cowboys to go in, or the direction, the position that we're expecting them to go in with the 12th overall pick. Now, I mentioned that in the creator mock draft, I had the Cowboys taking Matthew Golden. I also did a mock draft with my friends at Threads that was affiliated with the NFL account. It was a ton of fun. I took Ted McMillan there for the Cowboys. So that's what I'm saying. I think no matter what you do, no matter what mock or how many times you do it, and I know who you are, you've done a million mocks at this point in time, I think that it's difficult to kind of not feel like the best ones are built on taking a wide receiver first. But it is worth mentioning that today, Tuesday, I told you that this is the last time you and I are going to get to talk. It was also the last time that we got to hear from the Cowboys themselves. Now, this requires some context because not everybody, has been a Cowboys fan for as long as everybody else. Not everybody is chronically online as much as everybody else. And so that being said, every year, the Dallas Cowboys host a pre-draft press conference. This is exactly what it sounds like. It is the front office brass getting up and answering questions and sometimes stirring the pot relative to what they plan to do. It depends on how honest you think they're being in the upcoming NFL draft. Now, historically, there has been a lot that the team has some would say purposely telegraphed in this pre-draft press conference. If you rewind the clock 6-7 years or so, they were pretty straightforward about wanting Leighton Vander Esch. They were pretty straightforward about Tristan Hill. These picks had, again, become rather obvious before they ultimately happened. Even Tristan Hill going in the second round when the Cowboys didn't have a first-round pick 6 years ago in 2019. And so there's a lot that you can glean from this pre-draft press conference. But I will say, if we're being fair and calling a spade, they have kind of tightened that up over the last few years, and now they're no longer as obvious as over the top. Now, for what it's worth, last year, they waxed poetic about Jonathan Brooks and talked about how they wanted a running back. And if you recall, we all said last year, we said there's no way that they're not going to draft a running back. That would be crazy. And not only did they not draft a running back, but they brought Zeke Elliott back. And I bring this up because the context matters, okay? The context relative to a lot of things that we're going to be discussing here in a moment here. We're talking about last year's pre-draft press conference. Jerry Jones waxed poetic about Jonathan Brooks, like I said, went in the second round of the Carolina Panthers. The Cowboys didn't draft a running back. And in that pre-draft press conference, the Cowboys talked about how much they liked Zeke Elliott. Now, they did bring Zeke back. Now, maybe you forgot, but they brought Zeke back the Monday morning after the draft. And the news broke. I'm not exaggerating here. Look it up if you don't believe me. That news broke at like 6 a.m. on the Monday morning after the draft. So they talked about it, and they had very clearly done some homework and said to themselves, hey, if we don't come away with a running back we know that we have Zeke in our back pocket, we can go that direction. And like I said, at the crack of dawn on the Monday morning after the draft, they went and brought Zeke Elliott back. So I see your comment, Jake Cabrera 2355 says, Cowboys rarely do what we want or expect. That saying wide receiver feels right, being as it seems to have been the least addressed position in free agency. I agree with you completely. We'll get to that in a moment. I wanted to bring this up, though, relative to something that happened on Tuesday during the press conference in a weird kind of sort of way. You likely have seen things about it by this point. I'm sure you got the alert here in the Blue Report app. Stefon Gilmore, yes, Stefon Gilmore was spotted at the Cowboys facility at the Star. John Machota tweeting out former Cowboys cornerback Stefon Gilmore at the Star. Saad Youssef of The Athletic also tweeting it out. Joe Hoyt of DLLS as well. That was interesting. Free agent cornerback Stefon Gilmore just walked by at the Star in Frisco during the Cowboys pre-draft press conference. Now, here's the thing. Ian Rappaport threw some cold water on this and said later on after the fact, Cowboys are not signing Stefon Gilmore today. Read into that how you will while they're at it. NFL Network's Jane Slater added, this is true. A source informed me didn't know why he was here. It would later be reported that it was not football related. We still don't know. Who knows what Stefon Gilmore's got going on. But Jane goes on to mention, obviously, the role that Stefon Gilmore played in 2023. I only brought all this up to say, keep this in mind on Monday. It's very possible because we mentioned, and Jay Cabrera 2355 agreed, that receiver is the position most likely to be addressed by the Cowboys in the first round. At one point in time in this draft process, I think we all were at least tolerating or debating the idea of Will Johnson. I think that we've all cooled on that, right? Or at least I think the consensus has cooled on that. Now, maybe the Cowboys addressed corner in the second round, but it's very possible that you want them to go wide receiver in the first and take, Travion Henderson in the second, right? At a certain point, you just can't take the corner if you're taking other positions. So like Elliott last year, that's why I wanted to apply this context. It's very possible that Stefon Gilmore is not signing with the Cowboys today, that it was whatever the purpose behind the appearance at the Star was totally random. He just happened to be in their world headquarters for, maybe he was taking one of those tours and watching all the players work out. This could be a matter of doing homework and saying, okay, if the draft doesn't go if it doesn't go in a way that we like at corner, we know that we have Gilmore as somebody who can come in after the fact, after the draft. And if that's the case, no disrespect to Zeke Elliott, unlike the Elliott thing last year, this makes some sense. This is a player that can still help, a player that can still contribute. He was very good for the Minnesota Vikings last year. So if the Cowboys don't walk away with legitimate corner help, or at least enough help that they feel is adequate, I would love for them to bring back Stefon Gilmore. But that was kind of a tangential thing that happened during the pre-draft press conference. Before we get to the wide receiver kind of roster free agency debate, I do think it's worth mentioning something else that developed right after the pre-draft press conference. So, and all these articles, by the way, available at blogoftheboys.com. You should be checking it out 24/7, 365. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram's Nick Harris tweeting out, Cowboys owner and GM Jerry Jones indicating that Dallas isn't done. This happened, again, if you're unfamiliar with the format of a Cowboys press conference, whoever's speaking does the thing in front of the cameras and the microphones, and then when it's over, they have a little scrum on the side. And this happened in the scrum on the side. Cowboys owner and GM Jerry Jones indicating that Dallas isn't done in the trade market and outside deals are in the works. The exact quote, as Nick transcribed it, we're looking at two things that could happen before or after the draft, two pretty substantive trades been working on today. So busy day at the Star. What with the pre-draft press conference happening, the phones working on behalf of trades, and I guess Stefon Gilmore being there for non-football roster related reasons. Now, I buy this. I don't buy this in a watch out, all caps, sort of way. But I buy this because the Cowboys are very clearly interested in exploring the veteran trade market, right? Maybe in a Stefon Gilmore sort of way that we've just outlined. They feel similarly about running back. They feel similarly about wide receiver. If they can't find, if the board doesn't go a certain way, if they ultimately, zig instead of zagging, because the NFL draft is unpredictable. If they get sniped, maybe they have some things ready to go. If they, like I said, if they trade out of 12, right? I don't think that'll happen, but let's just say they do. And Ibuka doesn't fall to them, right? Or Burden doesn't make it, or whatever the case may be. Maybe they feel like, okay, if we don't get that receiver, one of the receivers in this class, we know we have this trade that we can pull, we can flip this switch and still address the position. So I buy this. We've seen the Cowboys trade for Kaiir Elam, Kenneth Murray, and Joe Milton so far this free agency period, this offseason period. And remember that they have 10 picks to work with. That's a lot. I mean, I know that we said in 2021 when they had 10 picks, there's no way that they're going to pick all 10 times, and that they ultimately did. I don't think that that's going to be the case here. I really think that I think that they have contingency plans, and that's honestly what excites me the most. I don't know that I trust this idea. I don't know that I think this is a good idea or anything like that. But what I will say is that they are at least preparing plans A, B, C, D, maybe even all the way down to like H. I mean, that is a very, very foreign thing, very, very foreign concept to the Dallas Cowboys, as far as we all have been concerned for a very long time now. So in that respect, I will give them their kudos. I will give them their props. So I like seeing all of those things. Now, back to the question in terms of what's going to happen, position, wide receiver, what the Cowboys have done. I think it's important to take one last look at the roster as it lies. And to do that, we're going to use our friends over at Ourlads. Their product is phenomenal. It's super easy to look at depth charts. As you can see here, if it isn't obvious, the yellow names are new players on the Cowboys roster. I can't close this pop-up, so apologies. Anyway, so we've got Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders at running back, Joe Milton at quarterback. We've got Robert Jones and Sadiq Charles at offensive line, along with Akeem Adeniji. We've got Paris Campbell at wide receiver. So you've got three offensive linemen here. You've got Paris Campbell at wide receiver. You've got a backup quarterback, so you don't need to address this position anymore. You've got two running backs. Now on the defensive side of the ball, I can close that pop-up. They've addressed basically everything. Now, obviously, Osa Odighizuwa is a retainment and not a new player, but they spent a lot of money there, and that merits involvement when we're having this conversation. So from a defensive line perspective, the Cowboys have added Dante Fowler, Osa Odighizuwa, Solomon Thomas, and Peyton Turner. Great. We've seen them add at linebacker. We talked about Kenneth Murray, but Jack Sanborn was one of their undrafted free agent, one of their free agent acquisitions. What happened here? And then we've got Kaiir Elam, the trade, obviously. Special teams, they retain people, etc. So if we look at positional need, wide receiver is the one that screams out. I do think that there has been a phenomenal point that's been raised by many people in the Cowboys football online community, and it has to do with Jonathan Mingo. And the subject of today's discussion is predictions. And so in that sense, I think we have to hedge our bet when it comes to predicting Ted McMillan, because that is my official prediction. I don't see how Ted McMillan isn't going to make it. I know that we think the Saints are infatuated, things like that. I know that we think that the Niners could take him. I think Ted McMillan's going to be there. I will say that my secondary prediction is obviously Matthew Golden. But that being said, if Ted McMillan is on the board, I fully expect the Dallas Cowboys to take him. But this is what worries me. Now, I'm paraphrasing what the great Bob Sturm wrote about this. I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not saying that you shouldn't draft Ted McMillan because you have Jonathan Mingo on your roster. But, if we're playing the game of how could the Cowboys be evaluating this? How could the Cowboys be looking at this? How could the Cowboys be making the stew? What ingredients do they view and assess that are already in the pot, in the cauldron that they're stirring here? They might view Jonathan Mingo as that player, as that prototype, as that physical characteristic. And they might view Ted McMillan as somebody who is redundant to them from an overall operational standpoint. That would be stupid. And I don't think that we would agree with that, right? In fact, we would vehemently disagree with that. But my point here is I don't mean to insinuate that this idea carries logic. So what I'm going to say is an oxymoron in my own mind. But on some level, the logic exists that Jonathan Mingo's presence means Ted McMillan isn't necessary. Jay Cabrera, 2355, puts it well, says, in theory, they have similar attributes, and Golden is something they don't have. Again, my point is not, oh, you've got Jonathan Mingo. You don't need Ted McMillan. That is in no way what I'm saying or insinuating, and I hope that that is understood. I believe that that's understood here. And Jay Cabrera, 2355, says, I definitely wouldn't agree, but it is possible they could think it. And I think it's more than possible, because it isn't just a matter of, I don't mean for Simi Fehoko to catch a stray here, but because I really like Simi Fehoko and I wish him well. But this isn't a matter of, oh, we spent our draft pick on Simi Fehoko a few years ago. He fits that physical mold. No, this is a matter of proving themselves right. This is a matter of, look, we traded for this guy right at the deadline 10 minutes ago. You know what I'm saying? This isn't somebody who's been around. This is still a relatively new player and new idea that they're still, in their mind, have the jury out on. And so because of that, because of the timing of if the Jonathan Mingo trade happened, what did it happen now? It was in November. So we're talking, 5 months ago. If the Mingo trade had happened 17 months ago, then I wouldn't feel as nervous about it in this capacity, because I think they would have had enough time to ultimately face the music on it and hopefully be willing to be humble enough about it, which never was something that bore itself out relative to the Trey Lance trade. But think about that. That is a good comp in more ways than one. Obviously, they went down swinging. They went down the way they wanted to on Trey Lance. They never, ever, ever acquiesced. They never, ever, ever said, fine, you got us, whatever. They never said, okay, we were wrong, everybody, hands up. They never, ever said that. And so because of that, I do fear and I do worry that they could say, y'all just don't know. You don't see what we see. We just got this guy, and he's going to have an opportunity to have a full offseason with us and a full offseason with Dak, and he's going to have a full training camp and preseason, and so we're good. We do not need Ted McMillan. So I don't mean to say any of this and to make it sound like I don't like the idea of Matthew Golden, because I really do. But I agree with Jay Cabrera in that they might view him as something that they do not have. They might say, yeah, Kevontae Turpin's really fast, but Turpin does his thing on special teams, and yeah, he has a couple of plays every now and then on offense, but we want somebody who can really take the top off on a play-in, play-out basis. And it wouldn't be a bad pick. I mean, to be very clear here, I would be okay. We would celebrate on a lower level than if it were McMillan, but we would still celebrate if come Thursday night Matthew Golden is the newest member of the Dallas Cowboys. But you have to understand this principle when you're making your prediction. So if Ted McMillan makes it, this isn't a matter, in my opinion at least, of the fact everybody has obviously over the last 5 years likened things to CeeDee Lamb, right? Oh, if CeeDee makes it, you got to take it. You got to pull the trigger. You got to take him over Kayvon Chason, and thank God they did. But I don't believe that it is a slam dunk to them. It is to me, but to them, if Ted McMillan is available at 12 overall, I don't think that they're like, oh, we don't even have to have this conversation. I think that they have a conversation, and I think that they might ultimately lean in the direction that they have somebody of the overall archetype, and that is something you have to consider. Now, this next tweet that we're going to came out just a bit before we started our conversation. So if you're watching this late, obviously this was well in the past. But NFL Network's Jane Slater, friend of Blog of the Boys, friend of the show, tweeted this out. Let me put it on your screen appropriately. So where are Cowboys leaning this year? It's Jane pontificating. Here are 3 names I'm hearing and to keep an eye on. Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolan. Walter Nolan has been a name that's kind of picked up some steam over the last, 10 days relative to the Cowboys. Tennessee edge James Pierce, and Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden. Jane's addition finally here at the end of the tweet tells you maybe they do want best player available, and some of the moves in free agency might allow that. Also, I've said for weeks here that trenches are a big point of emphasis. Now, before we look at the consensus board, I want to say something. Whoops, there we go. During the I think the most telling thing in the pre-draft press conference that was said was Jerry Jones talking about the hiring of Brian Schottenheimer, and he was giving Schotty, as they refer to Brian and the commentary and the back and forth, et cetera, that they told Brian Schottenheimer that they really wanted to improve the trenches. They really wanted to improve the run game. In fact, beyond that, Jerry said that in his estimation, the reason for failures last season had nothing to do with the quality of the running back. Still kind of like the Mingo thing, refusing, or the Trey Lance thing, refusing to admit that, Derrick Henry's kind of good and Saquon Barkley's kind of good and that Zeke Elliott and Rico Dowdle just weren't on that level. But that being said, he said that he puts the blame for the, calamities that transpired on the offensive line, not on the running back. And so if we read between those tea leaves, it stands to reason that, in placing blame along the offensive line, in telling Brian Schottenheimer in the hiring process that they wanted to place an emphasis on the offensive line, in praising the hiring of Clayton Adams, who obviously has a strong track record of working well with the offensive line, it kind of makes sense that offensive line could be the pick. Now, I know that the names that we just talked about here in Walter Nolan, James Pierce, and Matthew Golden don't fit that bill, but I do think it's worth mentioning that offensive line is more in play than I would at least give it credit for being, just based on what we heard on Tuesday. Jay Cabrera, 2355, says Golden to me could potentially be the best player available, depending on how it goes. If not a wide receiver, I could see offensive line before Pierce or Nolan. So let's look at something we've been obviously evaluating and assessing over the last couple of weeks, and that is the consensus big board. This is, if you're unfamiliar, what it sounds like. It's the consensus big board across the internet. So these names we all know, blah, blah, blah. Let's get down to the business of what we're having the discussions around. Ted McMillan appears to be the player who is best player available relative to not only our expectations, but relative to our concerns, relative to our interests, things like that. So Ted McMillan, Will Johnson, who, by the way, has a Chipotle order. Chipotle told me this earlier today. I'm going to read this to you out loud because it was very cool. You can go to Chipotle. It's not really an ad, just something I found interesting. You can go to Chipotle for a limited time, and you could order the Will Johnson Bowl. And I'm looking for how he takes it because it was similar to me, but it was a little bit different. And it's possible he could be a Cowboy. So I think this is very, very, very important information. Here we go. Will Johnson's Chipotle Bowl, double chicken, respect, white rice, pinto beans, tomatillo, green chili salsa, light sour cream, not for me. Queso blanco. I love the queso, but I want it with chips. I don't want it on the bowl. Cheese and extra lettuce. So good for, getting some greens in there. Anyway, back to the consensus big board. So we got Ted McMillan, Will Johnson. Kelvin Banks is a name to keep in mind. Nick Harris, the 4-Star Telegram, had a great article on Monday that talked about 5 non-receivers the Cowboys could ultimately take with that 12th overall pick, and mentioned Kelvin Banks, mentioned Michael Williams, edge out of Georgia. A lot kind of falls along the lines of what Jane said, obviously, relative to the trenches. And if Shamar Stewart was a name that Nick mentioned in his article. There's Matthew Golden. I don't know, Jay Cabrera, that I fully agree that Matthew Golden could be the best player available. But I think he could be the best player available relative to need, depending on how highly they assess edge rusher to be a need for them. But the name that kind of drew some, clapback or whatever from Jane's post was James Pierce Jr. Consensus has him as the 30th overall player. So that would feel like a reach. Now, I think it goes without saying, there were a lot of reports about this on Tuesday, but I think that we just can all assume this. I think this is true for most teams in the NFL. I think the Cowboys would prefer to trade back. I think that they would love a world where somebody comes up for one reason or another. Oh, I agree. I see your point, Jay Cabrera, that you meant of the 3 players mentioned in her tweet. Yeah, totally. I definitely agree with that. That of those 3 players, Matthew Golden is definitely in all likelihood the best one available wherever they're picking. But I could see a world, if I'm living in this hypothetical, where if they trade down, then maybe James Pierce Jr. is the best player available, right? If they move down to 26 or 27 or whatever, for whatever reason, right? Like it's impossible to predict, the number of times trades could happen, whatever. It's definitely in the world of possibilities that is a real possibility. I don't think you can say without a shadow of a doubt that X or Y is impossible. I think that's being too dramatic in general about the NFL draft. So, but Jane is a really credible, really well-established, really trustworthy reporter. So for Jane to mention these names, let's put this back up on your screen here, I think is significant. This means these are names to watch. We've been talking, like I said, about McMillan, about Golden, who's there. We've been talking about Ibuka, obviously. We've been talking about Burden, but we haven't talked to the same degree. Obviously, when you're picking as high as 12, everybody kind of gets thrown out as an option at some point over the entire draft process, just because the number of amalgamations and permutations that can ultimately be yielded relative to the NFL draft. So Walter Nolan is a name that has popped a lot. I don't know that any of us have really, I guess the best way to say this is I think at one point in time, you've probably done a mock where Walter Nolan was your pick. I don't think you've done a mock where James Pierce was your pick, at least not at 12. But again, this does suggest that they really value something about either the trench. I think the discernments we can take out of this are that the Cowboys either really value the trenches in a much more magnified way than is already obvious, or that, I mean, the fact that James Pierce is in the conversation is representative of, oh, well, we plan on picking in an area where James Pierce is the best player available, which would suggest that they believe that they have confidence in being willing to trade back, right? Because I think if I asked you, whoever you are, and you can let me know in the comments or on social, like I said, if I asked you for the likelihood that the Cowboys are going to be able to trade back on Thursday night, I think we'd all put it south of 20%, right? Just kind of throwing a random number out there. But maybe they feel like, and maybe they know, maybe that was one of the trades Jerry was talking about today that could happen before, or that wouldn't be able to happen after the draft. But maybe they have some confidence that they can move back. And maybe that confidence has put them in a position where they feel like they will be picking in a spot where James Pierce is among the best players available. They might move back that far. And I know that we're really reaching. I know that that's a point that's really kind of stretching to try to make the point or make sense of the point. But it's the NFL draft. And that's kind of how wild and crazy and ultimately fun this thing can end up being in its totality. But as far as lining up picks, as far as saying what we think is going to happen, that time has come. And I've already said it. And I'm going to kind of just tie a bow on this here. My prediction, and I will acknowledge this on Thursday night in the Bleacher Report app, obviously will be live, and it'll be on YouTube, and it'll be on social media and everything like that. My official prediction, I'm locking it in. I'm throwing away the key. The Dallas Cowboys on Thursday night will draft Ted McMillan. That is my prediction. That isn't, little birdie told me or a source. No, this is just going off my gut. All right. This gut that has some picanha in it that I smoked over the weekend. It was delicious. And I still have some left. I'm just over the moon about it. Shout out to Not to Be Trite on X. You know who he is. I know you do. He gave me some tips. And so going off my gut, right, my picanha-laced gut, Ted McMillan is the pick. Now, if I'm ranking them, like in order, like if I'm casting a bit of a wide net, I think number one, most likely to me on a prediction basis, is Ted McMillan. Number two for me is Matthew Golden. And number three is actually Egbuka. I'm going wide out all the way. I really, and some of it is I'm trying to manifest it, if I'm being honest with you. I agree with the point that we've seen the Cowboys address this position and that position, and they've added here and they've added there. But this is the one area of extreme concern. This isn't just like, oh, you could kind of use some help here. No. Like, you don't have enough NFL dudes right now. Like, you can't go play a game right now and compete. You have CeeDee Lamb, and he's amazing. But other than that, it's just a room right now. And I say that with all due respect. So you have to get one of these guys. And maybe you feel confident that one of them can fall to you at 44. I hope that that's the case. But I just don't think you can change that. And Brian Schottenheimer was asked by David Moore at the end of the press conference today. And by the way, the Cowboys and Jerry Jones spent some time acknowledging David Moore and his contributions to the world of sports and the world of the Dallas Cowboys in terms of his fantastic coverage for the Dallas Morning News, and congratulating him on his retirement. And I'd like to extend that same congratulations. David Moore, I've been doing this, what I've been doing, whatever you want to call what I've been doing, for about a decade now. And David Moore is the best of the best. And what I do, what so many people do, would not be possible without David Moore. He is fantastic. He is class. He is grace. Kind of like the Miss Congeniality song at the very end. In all seriousness, David Moore, a very happy retirement to you. I wish you all the best in life. Thank you for all of your hard work in servicing us Dallas Cowboys fans over the year. But I loved the question that David asked at the very end. We asked Brian Schottenheimer. He said, is this pick symbolic in any way because it's the first one that you'll ever make as the team's head coach? And I thought that was a great question because we're a week removed from Tyron Smith retiring, and Tyron was the first pick of the Jason Garrett era in an official sense. Obviously, he'd been the interim head coach, and Jason Garrett was at that ceremony. And so this is that kind of relationship, right? Like, this is the kind of Brian Schottenheimer is going to be tied to this person for a very long time. And I mean no disrespect to any other player, but I think you just have to get somebody that infuses talent in this offense as an offensive guy, as an offensive person, as an offensive coach, as the head coach is going to be calling the offensive plays. So I lean wide receiver. That's why my predictions are X, Y, and Z, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, McMillan, Golden, Igbuka. All right. My name is RJ Ochoa. You can follow me on X, Instagram, or Threads at RJ Ochoa. Shout out to the NFL for having me be a part of their mock draft on Threads this week. You can follow me on TikTok, RJ.Ochoa. Search RJ Ochoa on Blue Sky. You can follow me on LinkedIn if you're interested in that. You can like my Facebook page. All of my content is available on all of these places. So don't hesitate. Whichever one is your preferred platform, I would love to interact with you over there. rj.ochoa@sbnation.com is how you can email me. And of course, on the subject of .coms, bloggingtheboys.com 24/7 365 for the latest and greatest in the world of the Dallas Cowboys. And if you're into golf, I've been doing a lot of golf stuff lately. Playingthrough.com is our golf vertical at SB Nation. We've got the Chevron Championship going on this weekend, first major of the year on the LPGA. So the sports are sportsing. It's a great time. We've got, my Astros are kind of looking alive right now. We've got spring games, kind of. We've got, obviously, NBA playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, like chef's kiss. All right, everyone. I will see you as soon as the Dallas Cowboys have another new member of their team. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we will see you next time.